Thanks so much to my panelists who've joined me here today. Compliance today lies at the heart of every globally integrated business, especially when it comes to GCCs such as yours that are delivering on speed, scale, and agility, especially while navigating regulatory demands, evolving regulatory demands being the key word there. And now we're looking at AI governance, data sovereignty, cybersecurity, your sector specific requirements, managing all of that while ensuring that you have innovation, but really at the core of it to make sure that you're enabling trust at the end of the day, and also to make sure that you're operationally agile by being compliant. I find compliance to be a fascinating topic, especially because it's so complex. So, my first question to you is over the last 1 year, what would you say has been the biggest compliance shift that you have made, or you have, let me say, you've had to make, right? Made or had to make, I think both are the same. And how has that reshaped your operational priorities? I'll start off with you, Jaya.
Thank you, Shilpa. Hello, everyone. I am Jaya Wadhwani. I am representing HMH Tech India. On your wonderful question, I would like to say that recently there has been a lot of shift and focus on compliance with the new policies coming in, with the new, because government is also becoming more and more aware about these compliance policies. The DPDP Act, which has come in 2023, I think that kind of brought a complete shift in how people were perceiving compliance. It is not just limited to something which is done later in the business. It is now more driven as a culture. So recently with these guidelines which have come in, and now with DPDP 2025 regulations which are coming out, and its implementation has made these guidelines even more stringent. So as we move forward for every GCC, it has now become to have a compliance as a priority, as a culture, rather than something which used to be done, maybe later in the implementations, or used to be done when there was a government audits, or, ISO things were kicking in. It is more now driven as a culture and rather than an obligation is what I feel.
Like DPDP has been a big game changer there when it comes to compliance. I think every company has had to have that internal audit. So Kailash, talk us through that. Has DPDP made sure that you have changed your working systems too? Oh, especially since you work with the government, right? So
Yeah. So thank you so much. I'm Kailash Maisekar representing Idox. It's a British multinational company, and we are into government technology. So by virtue of our business, we are always under the lens, in terms of compliances. So just going back to your original question of what's in the last 1 year, we've been focusing on in terms of compliance is the whole AI. That we've been talking right from the board level. We've been talking about how do we govern, our AI practices? How do we, put some guardrails around, some of these practices? Because governments across the world have been stringently, coming out with policies, regulations, and things like that, which require us to, be more proactive in our approach. For example, recently, European Union actually came out with the European Union AI Act, and it's pretty comprehensive. It talks about a few things. One thing it talks about is a risk-based approach, right? It basically categorizes, your models and the companies into various categories. So if you don't fall into one of the categories, for example, it's a non-negotiable is one of the categories. If you're part of the non-negotiable category, that's it, you're done, right? So there are a number of regulations that you have to comply with. So right from the board level to our engineering teams, to our customers, one of the things that we've been dealing right now is how do we actually comply with these various laws across the world in the AI space. That's been our focus in the last 1 year.
well, yes, I think a lot of people feel it's premature right now to put those AI guardrails in, but that's exactly what we're talking about, right? If you have your compliance and you're proactive with your compliance, then you can always be audit ready. I'll take it across to you, Vikas. I like how you view compliance. I found it very interesting. So, talk us through that and also talk us through the biggest shift that you have made compliance wise in the last year.
Thank you, Shilpa. Okay, when we are from a manufacturing side, so we are building something which can be touched, smell, can be supplied. When it comes to the compliance, and I started a tech center, I ask my consultant how many compliances we need to do. As not even as a capability center, but as a competence center. He gave me a figure of 65,000 compliances you need to do. And with the 65,000 compliances, and then our government says ease of doing business. And these are conflicting interests. But then we went into a little bit more detail because GCC is not only GCC, it has a labor law, it has an industry law, it has a manufacturing law, it has a cyber security, data protection, it has almost everything. So what is the biggest shift, if you ask me, for our kind of a business is about more into the data protection. I'm not talking about the labor law because I think there's a different session to it. More specifically, it is for the data protection and cyber security. Because we deal with something which does not belongs to us. We get that, for example, a drawing. We need to create a matching part which has already have an IP, and we need to transfer this data back to the system, and there was a dramatic shift. And there we are still grappling with how we can secure ourselves.
You know, I'm going to come across to you, Kailash. We spoke about how you work with the government, right? Is it easier, or is there like a keener eye on you because you work with them? Your company is there in software, and you're also in public services. So how do you manage the multi-jurisdictional compliances? And when you tell somebody you work with Idox, how do they think you navigate compliance?
Yeah, that's an interesting question because being a global capability center, one of the advantages that we have is we have a world view of Idox, which none of the operating companies have. So if there are teams, legal and compliance teams sitting in the UK, they have the view only about UK. And the EU, for example, our French team or, US team, they have only US. Whereas in the Global Capability Center, we are actually managing compliances and legal for the entire group. So we have this world view. And therefore, by virtue of that job, what happens is, we get access to a lot of these different jurisdictions where we would have to, comply with. So we have put a couple of things in place. Number one thing that we have is we have a regulatory framework, put out, for various countries together. That's number one. Number two is we have a regulatory calendar, which basically tells us, for our teams exactly what compliance is in which country or what are the timelines, who are the people responsible, and all of that. Third is we have done a lot of automation. So when I say automation is there are routine activities which may require, just in terms of just complying with low-level things, we've just automated as much as possible. Again, there is a debate going on whether we should whether we should use AI there or we should just use the traditional, workflows and things like that. And last but not least is what we are doing is we have put together a comprehensive knowledge management framework which wasn't sitting in the group before. So we kind of created a knowledge repository where we have the, every jurisdiction, the country that we deal with, we have the knowledge documented, standardized, and prepared in such a way that anybody can understand. And add to that is also the knowledge, the language complexity. If you go to Europe, there are language complexities as well. So we have ensured that our knowledge management system is robust in a way that it basically captures all this amazing information that our teams can actually use, and it helps us in our onboarding as well. So this is essentially what we use as a framework, to manage our multi-jurisdictional, compliance.
That leads me, and I'm just thinking out loud. even if you have knowledge of all the compliances that are required across the world, right? A compliance can be very complex to understand, it can be ambiguous, and a lot of times across countries it can be conflicting. How do you deal with that? I'll take it across to you, Jaya.
I think it is more around the domain, around the region, as you said, jurisdiction, around the framework that needs to be designed considering all of these parameters, right? It's not just limited to how we see the compliance as a standalone thing. It has to be embedded into every stage of whether it is a technology organization dealing with something like what we are doing in edutech right now, right? These education regulations. Earlier, people used to think regulatories is more around the banking, around the payment systems, around your data privacy. No, it is not anymore limited to that. With the education system becoming so core base for countries like US, countries like UK, where they are driving educations, the compliance is even becoming more and more important aspect of how kids are learning, how education is given to them, whether it is, integration of a Gen AI platform, right? It is not just easy to just embed a Gen AI platform into edutech with government regulations coming around how this Gen AI should be exposed to kids. This compliance is becoming more and more stringent. I would say it is becoming more as a core part of anything that we do, whether it is part of the government organization, whether it is part of an edutech, automotive. It's not just limited to one domain, one jurisdiction, or one geographical area. It's more about how it is embedded in every step that we do.
It's interesting that you say that, because yes, we always think that there are some heavily regulated industries, automotives, for instance. You have anything in the public services, and we didn't know that education was so heavily regulated. I'll come back to that, but I'd love to hear from you, Vikas, as well. My question on how do you deal with conflicting compliances when you work across the world? How do you manage that, and how do you navigate it? And also, how do you deal with ambiguity when it comes to compliance?
Okay. Let's first understand what is GCC. You call it as a capability center. I treat as competency center. Because in manufacturing, when you support a manufacturing, there is a 4 stages you go through. One is called workbench. The guy has a limited understanding. There is a task or work packages comes. He finishes the task. Maybe he used only 20% of his cerebral capacity and he finished the task. Then comes the capability center. That person has a kind of a capability that he can perform a task which is process oriented, but it has an element of inclusion of his education, whatever he has done. Then it comes the competency, that you have an designing competency of certain electric control drives. And then it comes to excellence. And now we are at the moment, vision is to go to the competency. And I think we are hanging between capability and workbenches. We called ourselves a capability center. I mean, we are working out what kind of a capability we are doing it. At the moment, I'm sorry, I'm making a little bit starking remarks here. We are been growing capability center because the labor rate outside India is way high. I charge close to 28 euros an hour, wherein if I get the services from any part of the world, I may pay 70 to 130 euro per hour. Right. Now, I need to bring this capability to take it to the competency. Now, why India is getting? Because there is an education environment, there is an ecosystem wherein you can reach to a certain level and we can perform these tasks. Now, the point comes of compliances and cross-border data, right? Our problem does not start with workbench, where we have, see, government compliances, we need to do it because there is a sanctity behind it. But when it comes to your group companies, one in US and one in Europe and one in India, if you have to circle around this data, there is a certain protection law comes in. Like in US, it's highly sensitive to personal data, wherein with Bangladesh, you don't have to even worry about. And with the Europe, it is only 60 or 70% of the compliances you need to fill it for. Though we call it as an encrypted data, but still the compliance needs to come in. Now, my point of the compliance is my compliance level goes up as I go up to the ladder. I am at the workbench and capability. I have a least compliances because I'm not doing anything which is more important. Now I have a prototyping. The prototyping compliance is a big compliance because I'm using somebody else's data, designing my part, taking his part reference. That is also an IP protection. I am doing it, which I have a patent, and I'm merging them both. And data has to be secured enough. And that data is not for my captive usage. The data is going to US now. That diagnostic platform has to be met by my design diagnostic to make sure that I fulfill my OEM's compliance. So when you look at the compliance is a circular way where you start, you end up at there. But I'm sure as long as the government part is concerned, there is a sanctity behind it. We have gone through it. It is must. When it comes to between two companies within the group, or that can be dealt with respect to the severity of the task you are operating at your center.
I really appreciate your candor there. And I like the humorous way that you put across this compliance with, and also like previously when we were talking, how you said, when there's compliance, people complicate it a lot by saying, why should I comply? Why should it happen? I mean, there's a compliance and you have to do it. And it simplifies it if you stop asking those questions. Why should I do it? Must I do it? Right? I'll take it across to you, Jaya. We'll go back to what we were previously asking you.
Sure.
What are the regulations around education? I don't think many people know, So what are the complexities that you are navigating?
Yeah, I would just extend on what Vikas
Sure.
said on the GCC front. I will, based on your question, I will call GCC more as a global complexity center. It's not just easy to have these compliances aligned, whether it is education or any region. The kind of complexity what comes in is how we kind of embedded them into our products. So when we are kind of converting them into a revenue model, that's where all of this kind of kicks in, because eventually every organization is working towards a set of target revenue data and numbers. So it's not just limited that how you bring compliance, it is extended to how you embed these compliances into your product. So when it comes to education, there's a huge spectrum of how this data, whether it is your private data, how students are kind of logging into applications, what kind of access do they have through our platforms becomes even more important. Because now when this kind of data is available globally, there's a lot of chances that this can be used for a wrong purposes, and when it comes to students and teachers, the sensitivity even increases much higher. So all of these complexities around the education system is much more higher. Of course, it is not limited to how the transactions get impacted because of these compliant guidelines, but definitely there is a lot of emotional quotient which is attached to the tech, which brings through all these compliance guidelines and which becomes an essential part of the product development.
That's very significant indeed. So you move from being a delivery partner to a strategic partner by actually embedding and weaving in compliance throughout the entire ecosystem. Fantastic.
Because we are also, driving this as a change. We are also driving how this change should be transformed. Now we are only talking about the technology transformations. It is also the compliance which is getting transformed through all of these GCCs, which are now kind of taking the full ownership. Like every GCC has its own maturity model. And as we progress, the GCC maturity model kind of takes to the next level. The compliance maturity model also has to go to the next level. It cannot be the case where your compliance is driven, centrally by some company policies which are not part of your regional alliances. So it has to be more of corporate-driven policies, regional-driven policies, and your regulatory framework around it.
All right. So a very proactive approach to compliance by making sure that you're adhering to all these various policies from a corporate standpoint, from the ecosystem, from the government standpoint, to make sure that you're always audit ready, right? So I'll ask you this. Compliance is always seen as a deterrent, and nobody likes to deal with compliance, with the exception of those on stage right now. But if I were to look at it on the other side, can being compliant make me a differentiator and actually drive growth? I'll ask you first, Kailash.
Yeah, nowadays compliance is not a choice. You have to comply because now what's happening is, we work with governments, almost every government in Europe and UK and US and Canada. One of the things that we are seeing as a shift is, from a compliance and regulatory standpoint, is there is ethical aspect is what most governments are also looking at. So one aspect of your compliance is, yeah, you are meeting all the check boxes, making sure all of these filings are done, all of these regulatory stuff is already done. But the other side, what most governments are looking at, because we bid for a lot of government contracts, what they are looking at is the non-regulatory aspects which are more ethical in nature. For example, number one, they are looking at whether you are contributing towards the ESG goals. What's your carbon footprint? That's number one that they are looking at. Number two, if you look at, they are looking at what standards that you are maintaining, what kind of board stewardship that you have. Number three, they are looking at, if you are using AI as one of the technologies, what are the frameworks that you have put in place, and what are the compliances that you are actually mentioning that you have already complied with in your annual reports. Because they're not looking at just compliances from a checklist, but they also want to see this as part of your annual reports, right, at the section. Now what happens is, because of this, it's not just the governments, but it's actually investors have started looking at it, right? Your partners have started looking at it, your ecosystem has started looking at it, even the larger stakeholders such as the citizens, because our software is also used by citizens. A lot of city councils in the UK and Europe, they use our software to provide citizen services. Even the citizens are looking at us and evaluating us whether we have those ethical practices and we are publishing those as part of our annual reports or not. So therefore, it's not a choice anymore. You have to go beyond the regulatory compliances or the checklists. You have to go beyond that to ensure you establish the trust. You tell the world that you are maintaining standards. You tell the world that you are proactive in your approach, and you tell the world that you are the company who have integrity at the core of your practices.
That's very interesting how you said, brought forth the importance of ethics, right? Putting guardrails around your operation so that you preserve the ethics at the core. That's also important from a compliance standpoint. Would you like to add to that, Vikas?
Okay, thanks, Kailash. Okay, let me give a perspective to it. If an OEM says, I make good cars, what kind of a statement is this? If it is not good enough, it will not find a road. It will fail in the test. So quality is a hygiene now, and that's what we are looking for. And that's these compliances and making sure that you're good, you look smart, you have to do this. Now we are talking about connected cars. So that means a car, you start from Hotel Conrad and you wanted to go to Viman Nagar, and there is another car coming from Viman Nagar. Same car, same model, have a connected. So one car can speak to another car. And if I can give a representation that what we are doing is absolutely safe, ethical, then my customer would rely more on me. This I have to represent. Trust is a certain things which you cannot say. You cannot say, it was very funny when I said to my daughter, I love you. And daughter said, what is new in that?
Yeah, that's basic compliance.
So
that's true.
I don't have to tell my daughter every day that I love you. It is implied now. I have to say that I hate you. That's a new statement I need to make. So this is something which is, now we have went for a TSAC. TSAC is a very interesting one. Trusted Information Security Assessment Exchange. right? We have to comply with this, that what we are doing is absolutely safe, data is protected, cybersecurity no threats. And when I say I am TSEC, and the rest is all done, it's like I love you, and then says, yes, we know. And that's what the differentiator it is. And you know, when Jaya was saying it, I was wondering the kind of a compliances we have. We should go for another GCC who only takes care of the compliances
That is
for
true.
the another GCCs.
That is so true.
Jaya, you talk to us about it. Would love to hear your perspective on this.
Yeah, I think I agree with both of my panelists. It is not a differentiator. I think it is more of somebody who says that we know this space, we know that, this is how your business should operate. We definitely know that these are some of the mandatory requirements, non negotiable, ethical. Everything around is more about, we know how your business should operate. And I think that is also bringing one of the shifts in the GCC, which I want to kind of bring it in, that it is opening up a lot of opportunities around the recruitment areas of, how you bring compliances to India. It has been always understood that if it is compliance for a geography, the compliance guidelines have to come from that geography. It is no more like that. It is more of a global compliance centers which are taking care of, sitting from India, they are taking care of compliances which are kind of getting released in Germany, in UK, in US, or even in Bangladesh for that matter. It is no more driven that somebody will publish a compliance policy and maybe after 6 months down the line we'll read through it and implement. It is more about how we are driving from India. It is opening up new avenues, opportunities of becoming more and more around the governance model of compliance. There's a whole set of, I think if you guys are interested, you can offline check. There's a whole set of compliance guidelines and infrastructure and governance around it that can help build more opportunities in India and in GCCs for future.
I think that's a great note to wrap this discussion up on. You've been a fantastic panel. I love the candor that you brought to this discussion. I loved how candid you were. You shared your experiences here. And thank you for breaking down compliance for us and unpacking the complexity of compliance and how you are practically navigating through it. So it's clear right now that compliance is no longer seen as a deterrent. We've seen leaders such as them utilizing the fact that they're audit ready, that they're compliant to make sure that they are being a differentiator despite the sort of ambiguity and complexity that it's mired in, breaking through it and making sure that you have those checkpoints, but you're also being proactive. Thank you. Thank you so much once
Shilpa.
again for joining us today. I believe we have very few audience members here. Maybe we can take in a quick question. Does anybody have a question for our panel? Oh, go ahead.
Hello, everyone. My question is, in this modern world, what does this global companies do to create their contingency plan for evolving compliance? To elaborate more, different government entities pretty much comes up with different regulatory compliance, which will have a significant impact on, different sort of businesses. I just feel that, it is very important for the leaders, to give a perspective how they are ensuring that they are one step ahead.
I think Kailash was speaking about staying ahead of the curve. I'll ask him.
I can ask this question immediately to Kailash, but we'll love to hear that.
I can give you, the recent example. India and UK signed a treaty yesterday, right? A free trade agreement, they have signed. We are yet to see the fine print of it. But however, things are going to change. A lot of things, in terms of regulatory compliances are going to change, because erstwhile the things that we were actually going to have tariffs or some restrictions or some additional filings, I think those are the things that we are going to change in future. So therefore, once we say that if we now have a compliance calendar, we have a compliance framework, we have a compliance knowledge repository, and we are done, that's not how it works. We have to continuously keep looking out for what kind of changes that are occurring in the regulatory landscape, and keep updating our systems, our processes, our workflows, and our knowledge in a way that we are responding to those changes, not reactively but more proactively in nature. And that's what is more important to address some of this. Otherwise, you'll be late by the time the regulation is out.
All right, thank you so much for that. And now for all the other questions, we will have to take it off stage. Thank you once again for being an absolutely wonderful and engaging panel. And thank you to the audience members who stayed back right till the end of our summit and event. Thank you.